Hi, hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming because I had this title phrased the most elusive, most confusing I could manage, and people still showed up, which is quite wonderful. I don't know if you are so wise or so dumb, but we will find out in the next half hour. And also, I am very aware that we're very close to the bar, so and yet you chose to come to this room and not that one. So I feel privileged already, so thank you for that. It is wonderful to be back at the Brighton Develop Conference. This is obviously a hallmark of British development, and I've been here for an hour and a half, and I already missed 2 meetings. Met an old friend, organized a meeting for tomorrow, and had an impromptu meeting, which might make me money. So Develop is brilliant. My name is Imre Jele, and I am going to talk today about what we can learn as an industry from other forms of arts and entertainment. This is a topic I'm quite passionate about and been researching for a while, and I kind of embedded myself. I'm going to explain in a second how, but still, it's in early stages. So you are kind of my guinea pigs of testing of this content. So I will try to see your faces where I lose you and where I engage, but with this light in my eye, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be, but I will try to adapt today based on what's happening in your faces. So a bit of background, I've started a long time ago, and I've started in board games and tabletop role-playing games, worked on all sorts of genres over the years. I have been the head of RuneScape, if you're familiar with that MMO, and I had the honor to co-found Bossa Studios, which was most known and is most known for comedy games, although we're doing something very different. A little while ago, I decided to take a break from video games. I took a sabbatical, and I spent a year working in film, tele, theater, immersive theater. I was involved in an opera, which was brilliant. And so all sorts of things I could put my hands on. And after a year, I had to admit that it's games. Like, I love games. Games is what I want to do. But that year was really informative for me about what we are missing as an industry by not learning from other forms of art and entertainment. And as I realized that, I felt like I want to share that with other people. So I wanted to build up, even though I had firsthand experience in other spaces. I also did about 24 interviews with a variety of people from a variety of arts and entertainment, and it was extremely informative. In fact, in retrospect, I really regret not just recording them as a video and putting them up on YouTube, because they were amazing. Although, of course, also there was a lot of NDAs broken in those conversations, so there is that. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that there are thousands of years worth of art and entertainment knowledge out there. And game developers often seem to ignore a huge part of that wealth of knowledge. And I think that both we as creators, and more importantly, our games are weaker and poorer because of that. Games are the future. Like, I have no doubt about that. I think everything is going to be interactive, from advertisements to medical procedures gamified, to everything is going to have a game element, I believe. But it doesn't mean that we should ignore our past. And I think it's time to challenge certain traditional boundaries and barriers we set between different disciplines of art and entertainment. I'd like to do 3 things today. I'd like to encourage you to actively pursue knowledge from other arts and entertainment. I'd like you to find collaborators from other fields. And I would like to change your attitude about games and game development. I'm going to start with a bit of context. Then I'd like to use a few examples. Now, as I said, this is a gigantic topic. What can we learn from other arts and entertainment? Well, welcome to my 100-part, 2-hour-a-piece lecture series. It's an insane subject. So I try to drop in as many specific learnings as I can, but a lot of that is going to be, here is a homework you should take away and research for yourself because it is worth your time. I will talk a little bit about the theater, a bit of in general storytelling, and lessons around the talent and how we handle talent and what I found out. Now, first of all, a bit of context, as I said, of how old we are. Depending on how you look at it, games are about 60, 70 years old. Tennis for Two was 58, 62, 1962 was Space War. And that's decent. But the first television program airing was 1928. The first films was 1880. Books since the 15th century, the printed books. Theater, the first known theater building, which still exists, was 6th century BCE. And that's the first building. It's not obvious a theater place existed before. That's like a permanent theater building that we know about. The oldest written story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is 5,000 years old. The oldest paintings on cave walls are 40, 50,000 years old. So it's clear that we have this amazing backdrop. And yes, with some elements we use, but I don't think we use enough, and I don't think we go deep enough. And our journey as an industry and as a form of art was weird, let's be honest. And through our ages of development, as we were growing up as an industry, we changed a lot. At the beginning, and I had the honor of talking to some people who were around in original arcades, like the back in the old ones, like they were still working on pinball machines and then switched over to electronic with screens, and that was the crazy innovation. And what was interesting is that they described that various names, and they said that they did not realize they're making games. They were completely clueless. It was just a strange thing. It was not art, it was not tech, but it was both, and it was also something more. And those early creators did not realize they're making art. And I think that's very important. It's very important because the next era for us was an era of inspiration, as I'd like to describe. And in this one, we suddenly realized, well, we're doing something. It's a thing I can sell, and people are entertained by it. So it became a product and entertainment, but still not art. We were inspired by art, obviously, but often it was a very factual and very kind of objective thing. We licensed IPs, for example. And that would have been a great start. I think that would have been an amazing start for us to become someone, become something, but that's not what happened. What happened that the next era was the era of insecurity. And that's because developers realized that we're doing something unique, but everyone else looked at us and said, well, you're just making toys for little kids. And I feel like that created this response that, no, we're not, we're so much more. And that insecurity, again, would have been in a healthy person, that insecurity could have been followed by a moment of self-discovery, but that's not what we chose to do. What we chose to do as an industry, as a form of art, is to replace insecurity with overconfidence. And that was this sudden flip around. And we were telling everyone how much money we are making and how important we are. And I know that because I was part of that. Like, I joined the industry just around the tipping from insecurity to overconfidence. And I did that lecture. I did that lecture to TV and film people to tell them that, yeah, we're making $1 billion every second. I was really proud of that. And so the problem was that, again, if you look at it as a product and a business, makes sense. But when we talk about, even as an entertainment maybe, but when you talk about art, it does not. It kind of felt like, imagine a football player is trying to tell you that football is art. I'm not going to take sides on that particular question, but imagine that scenario. Now, but imagine that football player then comes in and says, we're art because look at how big is Wembley Stadium. And look at how many goals I scored in the last season. That does not prove that you are art. Yeah, those are impressive numbers, but that doesn't prove anything in terms of art. So that was our overconfidence and era of confidence. Now, once again, this would have been a moment that a person growing up becoming adult and getting through that brush, young, and would suddenly, but no, we once again, we choose not to do that, because what happened that we now, by this time, we genuinely made so much money that people started to pay attention, but it was the wrong kind of attention. We now suddenly had this flips around, and we start this shift that is not just about films and books and TV becoming games, but now games are becoming film and TV. And so what happens that we now had film creators and TV creators come to us to learn from us, or better said, to cynically steal from us. It was kind of like a blind leading the blind kind of situation, because neither side really understood or even tried to understand the other side. And of course, that led to a lot of confusion. And once again, insecurity combined with overconfidence, combined with this whole confusion, is just not right. But you might have noticed that at no point in this story we ever had a sustainable way of learning from each other. We never had a point where we collaborated in a meaningful way to elevate each other or really to learn from each other. We kind of lived parallel lives. Now, I'm going to start by the obvious when I said, like, what is it that we can learn from other arts and entertainment? Of course, there are a lot of obvious areas we can learn from, and some of them they're only going to take superficial things, and some of them are only tangentially related to what we do as game designers or artists or game programmers, but they are still useful. That is, of course, how films handle visual storytelling and cinematography, how a great book can trigger the imagination of the readers and put images in their heads with the right words, how deeply emotive a visit to the theater can be, or for that matter, a concert or a live sporting event, how stories are structured and paced, and how compelling characters are written, and all that, right? There's a lot of things we can learn. And of course, some of it we do follow. Color theory is color theory, right? Like life drawing is life drawing. And so there are certain things that we took up and we just run with. But I also feel like fundamentals are being missed. And I think one of the issues is that being a young industry, we feel like we have to prove ourselves. And that often leads to people thinking that they know better. And if you leave with this one piece of knowledge, you don't. You don't know better. And I'm going to come back to some examples about this later on, but this is the most fundamental thing, is that you are not weak because you ask for help. You're not weak because you're learning from others. It's the actual opposite of that. I think it's a sign of wisdom, and we should do that. So as I said, there are 3 areas I want to cover because I think they reflect different sides of what we can learn from other forms of arts and entertainment. And first one is I want to talk about theater, as I said, and later about general storytelling, and then about how to manage talent. So the first part is the theater. The theater is dead. And I love the theater. And you know that because I say the in front of the word theater. And also sometimes I say the theater. I adore theater. I spend as much time as I can. I volunteer, and I adore it. There's something magical about it, that people go on stage and they perform for me. Obviously, no one else is there. It's just for me. And I adore that. And yet, I am going to be the first to say that modern theater is full of shit. It's crazy. Storytelling is a dirty word in modern theatrical conversation. It's considered, and I quote, a genre work. And that's used with that kind of patronizing air quotes and tone in those conversations. And it's ridiculous. Discussion about modern theater is often filled with pretentious bullshit. They worsen the already existing culture war between theater goers and people who think that theaters are just pretentious crap. And that's just getting worse and worse because they became this self-referential kind of spiraling in their own knowledge kind of thing. They became, as I said, self-referential, and that's just really just the beginning of their problems. They also hyper-targeted themselves. And what happens in theaters is that they kind of over-fixated on money and archaic financial structures, and ultimately they cornered themselves and with their target audience. And let me explain. I don't know if anyone here is a theater goer, but if you ever go to theater, likely in a play, what you'll see is that when you look around, then you think it's good that they have a defibrillator. How do you say that word? That's the one. Someone said it right. That, because everyone is going to be like, everyone's going to be older than you. I know that there are plays where I went in when I could see that. I remember once where I bet no one was under 60 in the room besides me. It was ridiculous. Now, I think that the lesson here is, and I feel like games are increasingly guilty of this, is that we get into these spirals, and every spiral is just hyper-exaggerated. Look at what happened with NFTs. Well, it was crazy, and I'm not even going to take sides on that. I have not seen yet a game which was made better by adding it, but I'm not saying it's impossible. But then what same happened with VR, the same as every time we have a new buzzword, the whole industry just spirals into it, and everyone just wants to see a bigger number and a bigger number, and there's no conversation, there's no learning, it's just this hyper-focused thing. But also the same thing happens with monetization. I'm sure you've seen that. And I feel like just the same way as the theater is killing itself, as in literally the audience are going to die out, not because they go to theater, but because they're that old. The same is happening now in certain game genres because we are hyper-targeting and we are hyper-fixating on things. And people take abuse for just so long before they give up on your product. And if you are talking to investors, and I had the honor to do that, a lot of the fears about investment are around that now. They feel that because a genre becomes so successful that it becomes overstretched, and it's become an abusive relationship with the players, and players then drop out of that genre. But guess what? They don't just drop out of that genre, they often drop out of the entire hobby. And so it is quite a subtle point, but I think something we have to keep in mind. Now, I said the theater is dead. Long live the theater. There are a lot of theaters who started to wake up. And better said, people working in theater started to wake up. They learned a lot from reality TV shows, which is weird. And you would think, well, that's not a high art, but they know exactly what they're doing. And I spoke with some very prestigious theater directors who said they adore Love Island, which really made me question their artistic integrity. But there you go. They said that they learned a lot from that. So TV shows are blockbuster films and many others, and they learn from games. It's really fascinating. If you think about immersive theater, and by the way, if you've never been to an immersive theater production, I strongly recommend you do that. And hopefully my next immersive theater play is going to be available so you can attend that. But it's basically an adventure game. If you look at Escape the Room experiences, they are everywhere now, and they are super successful. They are basically puzzle adventure games. And again, a lot of theater people went there. Just a quick distinction, by the way, I don't have time to go into that, but theater work is a little bit more segmented than games. It's less typical that what we have is that you maybe have a publisher and a platform and a developer. It's a bit more than that. It's a significantly more fragmented market, but a lot of individuals working in this space started to wake up. And I think that the lesson here is that they looked outwards. They were ready to step out and said, okay, we're doing some really good thing. You know, I can fill the theater with a bit of Agatha Christie or a musical, but I want to do more. And so when they said want to do more, they did not just look at theater. They looked at other forms of arts and entertainment, and they managed to reinvent themselves, and not just managed to reinvent theater, which is happening, for example, in pub theaters, which are usually literally a theater play in a pub, which is awesome. It's very approachable. But also, they broke outside of that and established entirely new industries like immersive theater. So as I said, that the oldest one I mentioned is paintings and wall paintings being 40, 50,000 years old. But obviously, that's not the oldest form of art and entertainment. It's storytelling. There are arguments that we were telling stories before, as a species, before we even learned to talk. If you think about it, bees are telling stories when they go back home and they do that little dance. that was me doing a bee dance, they're telling their comrades of where the flowers are. And that's the same thing probably what happened to humans. We went back to our tribe and we told where the food is and which color of mushroom to avoid and what to do when a lion starts running towards you. And all of these were stories. And then those stories became just educational and then entertainment and all that. I've read a fantastic research which was suggesting that the first stories told very quickly became, there was interaction with the audience. So effectively, it's up to you to decide if they were choose your own adventure games or they were role-playing games. I decided that they were role-playing games, and I decided that they were rolling die. And the point is that I just love that idea that Stone Age people were playing D&D. And so, but that was the original format of that. So I think storytelling is a good foundation to talk about here. And I think that every single game is about story. Now, when I say story, I don't necessarily mean a crafted narrative where a narrative director or a writer somewhere wrote, it was a stormy night. Not that. I think a good run in Tetris is a story. And so I think every video game experience is a story. By the way, Tetris being a great story, Google later on, if you're not familiar with the sketch, I think it was college humor called Tetris God, which I think is a brilliant representation of why a good Tetris run is a story. So that's where I want to start. Now, the first of all is that you might be familiar with the old rule of storytelling in film and TV, which is show, don't tell. Really briefly, it means that if you want to portray something, don't just say, Peter was anxious, but say, make sure that the character, Peter, acts anxious, right? And I feel like we should have our own version of that, which is that play, don't show. Instead of showing that Peter is anxious, if Peter is your playable character, then make sure that the player is anxious, or like they can empathize with that feeling. And we have our methods to do that. We can do that with content. We can do that with mechanics and balancing, with music, with so many tools we have to achieve that. And some games do it really well. They don't tell their story through cutscenes, but they tell their story through gameplay. But I feel like we have a lot to learn, a lot to innovate. And one of my favorite examples is any other art form when they don't have money. And I think that the two examples I really like is one is new art movements. Because what's happening is that in the art scene, when someone wants to create, usually they look for a new look and a new identifiable visual which people like. And then when they find that, they create a bunch of work on that because they can sell, right? And that exploration is fantastic. I managed to talk to some people, and they do the craziest shit to find things. And of course, some of that becomes obnoxious, like, oh, I was just spitting my blood on the wall and see what patterns it creates. But you know what? It might actually look good, right? But the point is that they are reaching out, and they're looking at life to find inspiration. And I feel like the other one is indie films. In indie film creation, there's a lot of innovation is happening because people want to do a unique visual, a unique story, but also because simply they don't have enough money. Obviously, the legendary example of not having enough money is Jaws, where all of their robot sharks broke down. So this masterful suspense was created simply because all of his sharks broke down. If the sharks didn't break down, we would not have had that amazing film because they would have been able to show that stupid shark and probably would have looked stupid. And so limited resources are helpful. And I feel like we need to be ready to break genre conventions a bit more often. And I'm going to use a positive example here. I think it was last year released Unpacked. If you're not familiar in this game, Unpacked that's what you do. You unpack. Like every level is literally you are in a new home and you unpack. And frankly, it made me weep. It's absolutely magical. It's this idea that you go through someone's life journey as they have their own first bedroom and they go off to college or whatever is absolutely magical. And that's the kind of thing I believe that we need to do. Now, when we talk about storytelling, one of the buzzwords, and often when I talk to studios, helping them with their narrative stuff, or if I am on a side note, because I now, besides building my own new studio, I am advising other companies, or when I talk to like film or TV people, everyone wants to learn from what the other are doing to build universes, which I found, by the way, hilarious. But the point is that one genre convention which we have, which I think that we should challenge, is abandoned ruins. There are countless games which have abandoned ruins, usually voice notes, because that's what people do, right? They record their voice and they just leave it around, and maybe some static environmental storytelling. And our games are often dominated by these past civilizations and dead cultures. And frankly, ruins are certainly much easier to code than a living civilization. I totally get that. And exploring a ruined castle is fun, right? But I believe that real stories are about conflict and change. And they are best told in movement. They are best told by letting the player let them play through rather than to show it to them. As we said before, it's play, don't show or tell. One of my favorite examples of this is going to be from a huge game, from Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, I know that it's going to sound like, what use was that? Because it's a gigantic game, and who has that much money? But this example is actually tiny and cheap. This is going to be a spoiler, so sorry about that. There is a series of side missions where you can help a family build a home. And through multiple missions, every time you return to that location, first there's nothing, then there's a bunch of resources used to be built, and then a half-built building, and then a fully built house. You never actually see it being built. Just when you look away, it replaces, and you look back, and it's there. That storyline had a bigger emotional impact on me than pretty much anything else in Red Dead. Well, aside that one time when I was hunting one animal and the other animal knocked me off the cliff, because I think it's the animals unite against hunters. So that was a really emotive response, and it was very cheap. What I'm trying to say is that you can break conventions cheaply. Now, but when we're talking about building universes, there is some things that I found that often people don't consider. I urge you to go to music festivals and sporting events. You will discover some amazing ways they are telling stories and build atmosphere for their audiences. Of course, there is crowd control and visibility angles and audio cues. And that audio cues is what I want to talk about just for a minute. If you've ever been to a large sporting event, you're going to see that they often use these tones. So, for example, the opposing team, the visiting team, is in action. There is a special musical cue they use. So everyone will look up because they know what's happening. So if you were distracted, you look back up into the action. And not only that, but they manage the emotion. You can tell that the entire home team side of the stadium clenches up, and the visiting team will like, yay, something is happening. And that is just magical. It's like ballet with tens of thousands of people. Not only that, you make them sing. So now, which football fans don't realize, they're part of musical theater. They dance and sing to a director's word, because these tunes are now triggered to response from the fans, because they know they now have to sing that specific song in response. Now, I am not the hugest fan of football, but I have to applaud how well this is done. They create these amazing emotions in these audiences, and they genuinely play the crowd there in masterful ways. But possibly the best masters is these made-up wrestling federations like WWE and all that. Now, I'm not very familiar. I wasn't, and I was quite snobbish about this until once someone invited me and they got me a ticket. I went there like this. Remember, I go to the theater. And I went there really, I even tutted, I was the extreme reflection of my emotions. It took half an hour before I was shouting at the top of my lungs, the giant foam finger on my hand. It's absolutely magical how well they build that up. But not only just on stage, but off stage. They're telling stories. They build up a beef between two characters on social media, who they literally start arguing on social media. But they don't. It's part of a script. They're doing this because they're building up to an event, which is going to happen in a few months, and then they're going to follow up in some other forms during an interview afterwards or whatever they set it up. And I think that that's just masterful. And once again, this idea that you break out of your field and then you come back again. You go out of wrestling, you go out of the actual football, for example, and then you come back again with a loop with all the things that you've learned. Now, we can't talk about building universes without talking about Disney. Love them or hate them, you must not underestimate them. The mouse is ever present and mighty. Now, as you can tell, like I don't have a presentation, but I wanted to have a presentation which has one single slide at this point, which I would put on, which is a picture of Mickey Mouse, like leaning down with a belt and beating the living crap out of someone. And I was like, that's a perfect representation of Disney. But the point is that you can't really challenge them, and no one is going to beat them, especially not some second-grade politician with an ill-fitting suit. And so the obvious examples, obviously, is the cinematic universes, right? That's what everyone talk about. And I heard, oh, the Marvel saga is slowing down. And I was like, well, yeah, sure, might be true, but it's one of those other memes with the guy lying on the floor and wiping tears with dollars, bills, like $100 bills. That's like they created something amazing no one else could, and I think that's important. And I'm sure they're going to do something big next, as you would expect. But I think my real question is this: we are quite full of ourselves. We think like games are awesome, games are the future. I do believe that. And I'm like, but why aren't we Disney? Who is our Disney? Nintendo? Guess what? Nintendo is older than Disney, and I think their market is about 1/3 of the value. But forget just about the money. Just look at the cultural impact. Yeah, Nintendo is awesome. We love Nintendo. But their culture, the variety and reach is not even comparable to what Disney has. And it pisses me off. Why? Why is that? Like, why aren't we bigger? We should be bigger. I believe we deserve to be bigger, and we aren't. So this is one of those cases where I think we have to look at what others are doing because I want us to be better than them and I want to learn the tricks from them. A little side note, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but when Nintendo went from, just around the time when they went from making just Nintendos to the first one, which I think was like color TV game or something, the first device, they actually had a deal with Disney and they made a lot of money by licensing Disney characters. So Nintendo is also not free from Disney. But the real point of what I want to make is Disney parks and their creators, the Imagineers. In case you're not familiar, Imagineering is their research and development arm, and they are responsible for the creation and design and construction of all their Disney theme parks and attractions. And I had the honor to know some past Imagineers and have an interview with a present Imagineer as well. And again, just talking about that would be a multi-hour lecture. So I'm just going to distill it down for you because their environmental design and everything is amazing. And they don't rely on audio notes and old abandoned castles. Who knew it was possible? And they can set amazing moods. Now, your homework, I think, is to Google up and look about what they do with queuing. How Disney turns in a Disney park queuing into a ride is insane. They are extremely talented. But I think overall, the one rule which I took away is attention to detail. And there are a lot of presentation of that. And I'm going to give you one example, which I really love, is that their cast members, because the people in costumes, they look at them as actors. They're acting as that character, right? They have training about how to hug. And I'm like, that's just blown my mind. How awesome is that? It's not just some person in a random suit. No, they are actors who act like that character and know how that character would hug. And by the way, I got trained by an Imagineer how to hug, so I am a certified Disney hugger. I don't know, that might sound weird, but there you go. And so attention to detail. And once again, we can look at ourselves and we can be so, oh, I pay attention to everything. Do you though? Really? Really? Because the number of times I heard a game where the narrative is so important, bringing in a writer at beta. Really? Or someone who has basically downloaded a stock audio pack on the first day of prototyping, and that's on the final release of the game because they never got around to replace it. We've all been there, right? I'm not dissing anyone. I've done that. I'm just saying that we can't claim that we can match Disney if we don't pay attention to the details like they do. One of my favorite notes on this conversation was that this Imagineer told me a joke that they taste the paint they use in Disney Park to make sure that it tastes like Disney. And she laughed, I laughed, we laughed, but after the meeting, I was not entirely sure if that was a joke or not. I'm like, I kind of believe that there is someone's job is to taste paint, which they use in Disney parks. I am going to jump ahead here because we're going to run out of time. So all I'm going to say is that what I said before is that use the talent, what's already available. You don't always have to, I said innovate, but you don't have to reinvent everything. And as I said in the very beginning, no, you do not know better. Just because you read cinematography for dummies, that does not mean that suddenly you are the best cinematographer. That's not how it works. So bring in the talent, right? Directing is directing, acting is acting, writing is writing. Like, learn from those industries. And there are many horror stories, including one of my absolute favorites. It happened twice, to my knowledge at least. Both of these are two independent games from established companies. The actor goes into the booth to record their lines, and the lines appear on the screen because obviously they were not given beforehand, because why would the actor have their lines? And it shows up, and the line shows up alphabetically. Okay, let that sink in. It happened multiple times. So we are still there. And somehow we make all this money. Imagine if we were not this stupid, how much money we would make and what cultural influence we would have. I'm going to talk a little bit about talent because I keep alluding about how important that is. And I'm going to start with a general point, which is that you should tighten up and better communicate who is responsible for what in your game, and then give those people credit. I heard many times that game creation is very collaborative, and then you can't pick a single person and say, well, that person is responsible. I get it. I've been there. I've done the same thing. We accepted awards at Bossa every time it was for the team, never an individual. I'm as guilty of it as anyone else. And I see the reason in these arguments. But I've seen that argument being used too many times where appropriate credit could not be given simply because appropriate responsibility was not demanded. Don't let responsibility get lost in any area of your game. I believe that if we would better understand who is doing what, we can also reward them, but also it would allow us to come up with new ways of doing things. I guarantee you that your favorite TV show probably had guest directors, and certain episodes were directed by someone who was not part of the original crew. And I just wish we could do that in games as well. And the only way to do that is that if we better understand who is responsible for what. One example, which I think is really lovely, is that in our industry, most of the awards are going for a game to best game or a genre, like best action, maybe it's even worse, in my opinion, the best PlayStation game, whatever that is, right? And we don't give enough awards for crafts. Look at TV and film. They have an extensive list of awards for very specific craft areas. And by the way, those jobs are union-protected jobs as well. I'm not saying you should unionize, but you should unionize. And so, for example, BAFTA has a TV award, but they also have a TV craft award. And then just look up the list on that, and it's awesome. I wish we had a Games Craft Awards as much as we had a BAFTA Games Award. So understanding responsibilities would just make us better in general to allow people to specialize and be rewarded. I always like to do this, that I'd like to hunt down, like when I play a game and I really enjoyed one part of the game, luckily I've been around the industry long enough that I have enough connections that I hunt down the person who was responsible for that level, and I just badge it until I found, and I send a personal email to that person to say, I really love this, and I hate you because I wish I came up with that, and this was brilliant. But the fact that I have to spend hours to figure out, that's ludicrous. I want to know. And I'm not going to name one specific Japanese game director who is apparently designed, written, directed every single level of their game. It's strange. It's almost like they had no team to help them. So I feel like we go beyond that. Ultimately, we need to open up and bring in other people. And when I said that, the idea is that we go outside of our comfort zone and we bring it back in. And what we have to do here is that bring back the talent with us. I have a couple of examples, and because the nice people back there waving at me like this means that I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to give you a quick example. I've worked with location scouts, theater stage designers, and cinematographers to design scenes in games I've worked in. But my absolute favorite example, and I've done it multiple times now, is to design characters in a game by involving not just what you would normally do, maybe a concept artist or a writer maybe, but I had costume designers, makeup artists, and my absolute favorite is casting directors be part of that. And the casting directors absolutely loved it because, as they said, they're not limited by meat. And that just shows how much respect they have. But anyway, it was a joke. But the point is that they absolutely loved it, that they can come up with anything. They're not restricted. And we created some amazing characters. No art is an island. And I'm going to finish up now. I jumped through a couple of chapters. I apologize for that. No art is an island, and games are no exception. We are living in an age where the loop of cultural iteration and culture and counterculture faster than it ever been. A meme, which now lasts a month, would have probably spawned a religion if it was in medieval times, right? And it's like we're just cycling through things so fast, and it's awesome. But I think it also means that we would have this opportunity to learn, but we don't. A lot of video games seems to be kind of an inner self-feeding loop. Frankly, it's inbred. How many people in this, how many speakers are at this conference who are not from the games industry? I highly doubt that there are any or very, very few. There should be more. We should have costume designers and makeup artists here to talk about character creation. That's how we would really learn, and I am really upset that we aren't, because we could do more. I find that there are huge differences between, of course, theater and a video game, for example, but there are also, the more I digged into it, the more the similarities there are. There are more similarities than you would think, and there's a more learning points than you would think. And the interesting part is, on a fundamental level, they share our desire to create entertainment, to tell these amazing stories, to engage people. That's the same for the highest art of theater and to the latest MOBA, whatever you are creating. And I find that it's all about, as I said, going out and learning. And it's not just other arts. Of course, go to concerts, play video games, read books, get lost in a strange city. But I think it's about the wider life as well. I found that just looking at life is different. I noticed, for example, that multiple times on my walking commute, I could remember every single dog who went past by me, but not a single person. And I was like, that was ridiculous. And so I deliberately started paying attention and looking up at people's faces. It can get weird because sometimes look like this. Don't do that. But otherwise, people watching is great. I think what was the joke that I love people watching? Particularly this one person. It's like, don't do that. Like, you want to spread it around. But the point is that learning from life is what we need to do. It's going to make you happier, it's going to make you wiser, and I think it's going to make you a better creative person. So yes, pick up the book that you thought is ridiculous, watch Twilight, do the things that you wouldn't normally do and normally engage, and I guarantee you that if you go in with an open mind and open heart, you will come back as a better game developer. We boast about the money we make. We are less than humble about our influence we have on people. We proudly say that games are art. I think it's time that we actually started acting like it. We must elevate the art of games to where it belongs in human culture. Thank you. Thank you.